with that, we view addiction and recovery as a quiver. And inside that quiver, we try to fill it with as many arrows as possible, like yoga, exercise, our bus pass program, CBT therapy, ACT, and now we're going to throw one more arrow into that recovery quiver called DBT. And with that, I want to turn it over to Kristen, who is going to start things off by, why don't you give us a little bit of background about you and your amazing partners in the practice, and then dive right into DBT to whatever extent you want to do it, Kristen. Okay?
Wonderful. Is that okay, Dr. Besler?
Absolutely. Are you kidding? I'm dying to hear you guys.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having us. I'm Kristen. This is Jill and McKenzie, as you already were introduced. We're really excited to be here because DBT is very near and dear to our hearts. Our whole practice, when you mention Wise, why is our name Wise Practice? Wise Practice is after Wise Mind, which is a core skill in DBT for core mindfulness, where we make our healthiest decisions when we're using emotion and logic. So we love DBT so much. We left the hospital setting to create a outpatient service where people could gain accessibility a little bit easier than needing a really high intense level of care or needing to go to the hospital. So I'm here just to give you a brief rundown today in terms of what is this DBT thing? What are these 3 letters? And then I want to talk to you about why would we even be using this for the recovery community? What does the research say? And then also, how do we get access to this? How do the people in the community, especially for our recovery population, how do they access these tools, and why should they? So first thing I just want to point out, the stat hasn't changed too much. 1 in 4 people struggle with some type of mental illness per NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. The reason I bring this up is because at our practice, we really look at mental illness and addiction in a trauma lens. So when we think about that 1 in 4, a lot of those people are struggling with traumatic life experiences where they're coping through their addiction. They're also struggling with trauma. And so the reason I'm noting those before we go into DBT is because when we think about treatment for addiction and recovery, a lot of us think about, for example, maybe going in to sit with a therapist and processing our story, or going to the doctor to get medicine, or maybe going to an inpatient rehabilitation to detox. What we might be missing, though, is getting people hands-on tools and the detriment that can happen when somebody goes to process trauma and life events and the experiences they accumulate through their addiction before they have skills to navigate how that's going to hit them. Okay, so I want you to be thinking as I'm talking today, not so much just about addiction in this vacuum of disease or disorder or problem, but as a trauma, and of course can have a disease component, but I'm going to be talking to you about how DBT can be this vessel and toolkit people can use while they're processing and healing from this trauma in a healthier way. So first thing I'm going to go over is DBT, where it comes from. So dialectical behavioral therapy, that word dialectical, is really focusing on looking at balance and opposing views of everything. So when we look at an emotion, instead of what we hear in the, a lot of us hear things like, that's a good feeling, a bad feeling. In DBT, we learn skills to look at both opposing views of all sides. So when we think about recovery community, I don't know about you, but I think about a lot of stigma. I think a lot about a judgmental approach where we focus on a problem and we tell somebody to get better and try harder. And it doesn't always feel so compassionate, right? So DBT comes in here and identifies that though we need accountability, we also need compassion. We need acceptance. We need to be right there with this person, not doctor here, patient here, therapist here. We're all right here and all in this together. So going back to where DBT comes from, brief overview. It stems from cognitive behavioral therapy. So Marsha Linehan is the creator. She initially developed this to treat people with borderline personality disorder. Again, we look at that as people who've experienced trauma. Even that has a very stigmatizing name right there, which can deter people from getting treatment. So what she found in helping people with cognitive behavioral therapy is that with too much of a focus on thought and changing behavior, it's invalidating. There's not enough time in a therapy setting to process, validate an experience, but then also stop feeling your emotions and let's learn some skills now. So she found a modality, a way of adding to CBT. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with CBT either, that's an evidence-based treatment where we're really heavily focusing on shifting our thoughts and our behaviors for change, which is great and needed, but the missing component is how do I regulate my emotions, identify that they need to be in the room to make decisions, and then also what do I do with my community and my relationships? How do I ask for things, say no? How do I get more effective? So she brings this into the therapy. In terms of adaptability, before this became validated for things like PTSD and addiction and anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, when we were looking at this just for BPD, this is for a very intense acuity. And what I mean by that is people that are struggling with things like suicidality, self-harm, crisis behaviors. So we think about addiction, some of these things can overlap: crisis, problematic behaviors, problems with regulating emotions, things like that. So in adaptability, if we didn't have this treatment in different settings, it might be a little overwhelming. So if you're going for a straight DBT program, you'd probably be in this for about a year. There would be a skills group where you would just go kind of like a class. So think about going to math class, you're going there, you're just learning math. Then you would have a process component to do the therapy outside of that. You'd likely have a community application group with your peers. And your family and support system would also have their own treatment on top of that. And then there is accessibility to something called 24-hour skills phone coaching. So that's a very intense level of care, which would be awesome for everybody to have. But unfortunately, not everybody has accessibility to that, or at least here in Michigan, you often need a referral from a physician or a BPD diagnosis, or there's long wait lists. So at the end of my spiel, we are going to talk about how do you get this DBT light thing and how can we get this more for people in the recovery community who might not be needing all those bells and whistles. For example, at Wise Practice, we offer some of those. I'd say they're more like a la carte, where you can just get the skills and you might not have to go through the whole intensive program.
And Kristen, just to interject here, when you talked about a waiting list there's a waiting list for therapy in general. For DBT, the people that I tried to help get connected with those resources, I think it was around 8 months, and it was only for the most acutely ill people.
Right.
Okay, well, so sorry about that, but I wanted to let people know what we're dealing with here from the perspective of how long those wait lists are. Right. So keep going though, Kristen. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's great. I love that you chimed in there, and DBT can be very confusing. And I ramble a little bit going back to the CBT thing as well. Even though CBT may not have the high intensity of DBT, you can still run into the accessibility problems. So when we get to the end, we're going to talk just about where would you get the light version, because not everybody needs to go to somebody who has a full-on behavioral tech. It's a place to get certified in DBT. They might not need that. They might need an informed therapist or coach who has training. And I'll tell you a little bit about a database people can go and look. Just right now, before I forget, there's psychologytoday.com where you can see if people have any training in that. And if I run out of time too, we're an ally to help people navigate if they're running into a wall. And then as Mario mentioned, it's a huge weight, and DBT is for everybody. So as much as this is for people in recovery who need skills to utilize, this is also for their loved ones. Their sponsors getting the call in the middle of the night who it would be really great if they had a skill to do with them, or their mom or dad who's struggling with boundaries and communication or using a skill with them. So there are ways to learn about DBT as a support as well as somebody getting the services. Okay. So I'm just going to go over very briefly now a little bit about why this for recovery. and then some of the skills we might use. So DBT is not to take away from any other integrative approach to healing and recovery. It's there to help. It's additive. So I think of in a hospital setting, everybody's getting dietary. We're not saying just some patients need to make sure that their diet is okay. We all need to eat, right? And have intake. DBT is a vessel like that. It's not going to replace the other types of healing approaches. So why would we use this? So non-judgmental stance. We don't use good, bad, right, wrong language. We are not labeling. I don't know about you, but hospital setting reminds me of people saying things like, that's a med seeker, that's an addict. We don't use language like that. We're two people right here together. Okay. We're giving people tools that are empowering. So if you think about addiction, I don't know about you, but I work with a lot of people who do either ineffective coping or they have addiction and they don't feel good at things. They're really good at their addiction though. Right? DBT is a way to empower them, to teach them things that they can use to help themselves in the moment. So it's very empowering. It's actually pretty easy to learn and use. We find that these are pretty simple terms and we can actually get them a lot faster than a year. So for example, at our practice, anybody could take a 6-week course to just get basic foundational tools. It's not copywritten. You and I can go on YouTube or Google and get free therapist aid worksheets. We can watch a skill if we forget, if we don't have the financial means or we couldn't get into a phone coaching program, anybody can access it. So if I'm stuck, I can grab my book. I can grab something online. There's tons of apps that I can use. So it's easy to get in real time. It definitely supports other components of the addiction models like motivational interviewing or relapse prevention model. And we look at research, they still have a lot to do in terms of looking at DBT as a primary treatment, but as far as additive, behavioral tech, one of the training institutes, they have some good stats if anybody wants to jump on there. But when you're adding DBT into a traditional SUD program, they have some really good information in terms of people are able to maintain periods of sobriety longer, which is wonderful. So what could skills help with for addiction and at what point in addiction or recovery? They're helpful at any point. This could be somebody that's pre-contemplative with stages of change, is not sure if they are wanting to explore these skills. They can dip their toe in the pool. They're for people that are in maintenance or maybe have had a relapse at any stage. Let's think about some of the discomfort that comes with going through sobriety. If you think about somebody who's new to sobriety too, and we talk about mental illness and trauma, a lot of us at that point are going to start feeling things very strongly that we've been numbing or escaping. So that can be really hard and painful. These skills are going to give somebody tools so that they can get through that discomfort in the moment. So for things like triggers or cravings, there's two very specific sections in DBT called dialectical abstinence and harm reduction. And they're very specific tools just to help somebody for sobriety or harm reduction. Great. So I'm going to get into like, what are these skills I keep talking about? It can be a little confusing. So just to break it down real quickly of what we've gone over. A main program, a comprehensive one, could be about a year long. It might be for somebody with BPD diagnosis, high suicidality, self-harm. Substance abuse can definitely be in there, but it's not the primary. Hard to access, year-weight programs. And then we have the light version, which is an opportunity just to go and learn these skills or do them in a therapy setting that is less frequent, like you're coming in about once a week, or for people who are really good at homework and have a ton of support, maybe bi-weekly. We wouldn't recommend you probably start there. With these skills, what we're doing is we're working to create a life that feels very worth living. So when we think about mental illness, a lot of people that I've worked with, they don't feel they have worth at that point. We talk about addiction, we feel a lot of shame, we feel a lot of guilt. So we might not feel good at things, we might not feel worthy. DBT is coming in there. The goal is not necessarily to teach you self-esteem, but it's definitely a way to help you build that and create a life that feels worth living. So there's 4 main areas in DBT. Mario talked about one of them, which is huge. It's mindfulness. I want you to think about this as a house, DBT, if we're building a house. Like Jill always talks about this. So we're usually starting in hell when we get introduced to DBT, and there's a lovely ladder there for us to climb up on this house, but we're going to start with core mindfulness. So we're just going to learn skills to be in the here and the now, to learn how to tolerate the now, to not be too worried or too ruminative. But it's not also about informal mindfulness. It's also about what do I do in the moment when I'm very overwhelmed, or how do I make a wise mind decision, which is not too emotional and not too logical, but just balanced. So other than the mindfulness for using our house, we're going to go up a little bit. We need tools also to get through a difficult situation or crisis. What do we do when the house is on fire? We need things we can use in the moment. So an example of that would be like our tip skill. And tip, we're not going to go into that in detail, but in DBT would be a crisis distress tolerance tool for recovery. We could use in the moment. Let's say I'm having a craving. I'm going to go put my face at freezing cold ice water. I'm going to do my fast-paced breathing. I'm going to use skills that are going to manipulate my body chemistry before I go to do this thought stuff. That's the major difference with DBT and CBT. I'm not going to use thinking skills in a moment where my emotion and addict brain is on. I'm going to use those skills. Other than that, we have two other major modules in DBT, which are emotion regulation. How do I keep myself well so that when things do happen, I'm not as depleted or triggered, or I'm less likely to act on my urges or cravings? Or let's say I'm more likely to go call my sponsor or engage with my physician if something's going on. My last set of skills is interpersonal effectiveness. So I don't know about you, I think about my career and I think about so many of the people I've worked with have had ineffective coping, addiction, trauma, and their relationships after they have endured all of this have crumbled. They don't know how to ask for things, say no. They don't know who should be in their lives, who's safe for them. They want to rebuild relationships that were destructed in active addiction. They might not even recall some of the things that have happened. Right? So this whole section is how to navigate, how do I build healthy connection and relationships and maintain them? And also, how do I politely and respectfully get rid of things that don't serve me anymore? So these four main areas, for example, if you were coming in for coaching, you're going to learn very specific skills. And one of the things I love about DBT is that there's tons of acronyms. So if you're going to coaching with Jill, and maybe you're going over homework, because there's a lot of homework, there's a lot of accountability. You might be going over, okay, well, what did you do for mending that relationship? Did you do your dear man skill? Did you pay attention to give or fast? So there's a lot of tools to help them, and the acronyms are there to remind them. So where I'm going to end, am I good on time, Mario?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Another minute or two. And
Okay.
we're going to turn, you know what, I just realized that we had talked about Dr. Wendy going first.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so let's just, let me say this, if anybody's good at improvising and kind of flipping it, it's going to be Dr. Wendy. So in any event, you're doing an amazing job. Keep going, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Wendy.
Okay.
Mario, we thought you wanted Kristen to practice her distress tolerance skills.
Okay, well, good. So, sorry, so much for dry runs, right? But
That's okay.
It's okay. So you guys keep going there, Kristen, and you're doing a good job. And I just before you wrap things up, the thing that I notice a lot when I'm interfacing with people in recovery, not always, but just how thankful they are for what we're doing, the gratitude, the and how they respond to just, you can do this, you know, and not having that confidence that you talked about, you know, that so this is relating to me that there's so much that maybe I'll come to you and get DBT therapy. I mean, it just sounds like there's a lot of value to all of us, but in particular, people that you're describing. So with that, keep going, Kristen.
I love that you mentioned that too. So, you know, where I'm going to end with this is that skills and, it's called dialectical behavioral therapy, but that can be very confusing because not everybody is going to benefit from all the components of DBT. It's actually easier for me to tell you who it's not for than who it is for in some ways. So for people that have done all the processing in the world, they've gone into a session once a week and they're talking and they're talking, they're not getting anywhere. This is where they need skills at this point. They've done a lot of the talking. And in fact, some of that can actually be re-traumatizing and keeping them stuck. Right? For the person though, that's done a lot of problem solving and skills, they're intuitively just trained to go to the gym and do meetings and all these things that are very logic mind. They might need to go into more of that processing world. So DBT offers it all. It helps with the CBT component. How do I shift thoughts and emotions? It helps with community, relationships, but it also is separating out skills from processing. And so we've got, and that's also where this duality with acceptance and change comes from. So in skills, we are learning about acceptance and skills, but we're doing a lot for change in skills. In therapy, we're doing a lot of acceptance for all the things that have happened in our life and really encouraging those change skills you're learning with Jill or McKenzie in the therapy setting. So to wrap it up, where is they going to go next? I was basically just going to talk to you about who is it for and where to get it. So you can't unlearn things. There's a gentleman, Lane, who teaches DBT, and I love that he brings this up. I can't unlearn how to take my sweater off. I've learned how to do it now, but I can learn something new. So I think we forget about that with addiction. A lot of times treatment team or loved ones, we can be so harsh because we might be and are what we call emotion, mind, and DBT. We care, we're frustrated. So we might be focused on that they need to be doing something else. Well, we can unlearn, and to also give that person credit in active addiction. They developed a skill that's not working, but they're trying to help themselves, and that deserves some credit. So DBT comes in because you can learn new things. So what I want to leave people with is this is an opportunity to help give people tools and empower them, and also build new evidence. If I'm in my office and I'm showing somebody a skill works, as opposed to telling them to go home and do something, they get new evidence, they're more likely to go and do it now and build that self-esteem. So in terms of who it's for, I can't stress this enough. Everybody being here, I love that you're here. This is for everybody. This should be in school systems. We've done this in high school. We've done this for a community mental health provider. This should be proactive. We don't want to rely on this reactively. Although DBT has distress tolerance, and that's heavily where I could see peer supports helping each other out and using this coaching to get people out of the heat of the moment. We don't want to rely on that because time is one of our biggest factors in coping. We don't want to make it worse. So we want to be proactive with this. So it's for everybody to learn, because no matter who you are, all of us have to regulate our feelings, navigate relationships, be in the now, right? Get through difficult times. That's part of being a human. But for professionals, in last 10 years of being a social worker, I've seen a lot of funding going to training professionals, which I think is great. But I would like to propose that we start to think about how do we get this to the people in the trenches, the person getting the call at night, the mom that's worried that doesn't know what to do, but actually getting these tools to the people that are right there with the one in need. And also vision's one of our strongest senses. If we can't see it, we're likely going to do what we used to do. So if we get this info in front of people, they're more likely to use it. For people who are in this space where they're needing support for their own recovery, it's definitely something that you don't have to necessarily wait a year for. Our practice is opened up about a year ago. One thing I want to mention about this is it was kind of a new idea for us to say, hey, we're going to take skills outside of therapy in the community, and we're not going to do a year program, and you're not going to have all this intense criteria. We've since seen other places doing things now, like DBT memberships online and things like that. So there are providers jumping on this train, so to speak. If you're somebody who has Medicaid or finances are tight, this can be a big barrier of finding DBT. But a lot of the community mental health places, that's where you would go. It's Washtenaw Community Mental Health. If you're in Oakland County, Oakland. I'm not as familiar with the very specific Washtenaw providers, but for example, in Oakland, CNS and Easter Seals have some DBT providers. You can go to psychologytoday.com or you can call us. And when I say that, I don't mean that lightly or that it means just to come see us, because even in this hour, I'm sure a lot of people might be wondering, wait, what? There's all these parts to it. So if you need more support, we're here to help you with that. But I think that's about it.
Sure. So that everybody knows, we cut and pasted a link from Psychology Today, the one that you referenced, Kristen, in the chat feature, information on DBT therapists, and there it is again. Angela just pasted it. We've got a question that came in that I'll address, but after you, Wendy, talk about dialectic behavioral therapy.
Oh, awesome. Well, number one, thank you guys so much for just inviting me here, and hello to everybody at home. And Kristen, that was absolutely phenomenal. That was beautiful. So my name is Dr. Wendy Besler, and as Mario also said, I'm a bit of an unusual egg, as it were, and I'm quite old. So I started out doing, as Mario said, I was a PA in neurology for about 10 years, and figured out that I just needed to know a heck of a lot more. So I wound up going to medical school and went into psychiatry, and now I'm practicing neuropsychiatry. So this addiction happens to be one of my all-time favorite topics, in all honesty, because there are so many layers that I don't think individuals really understand when it comes to the brain. And the beautiful thing about DBT and what Kristen was actually bringing forth is DBT is one of these amazing therapies that we now have available to all of our patients that actually can help on numerous different levels, especially skills. So the human brain is an absolutely amazing place, and it's very experience dependent, and it actively changes, completely throughout our lives. So one of the ways that we actually term it is something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is as these inputs come in from the outside world and we learn how to deal with different issues, we lay down kind of these pathways through the brain that says, okay, this happens. This is kind of my default pathway. This is what automatically I'm going to do. So especially in addiction, many times individuals come into certain surroundings, different things have happened. They may have come from a traumatic childhood. They may have they had a great childhood and had some other issues come in later on in life. Many individuals, especially with addiction, and I think this is incredibly important to remember, that this is a neurotransmitter issue within the brain. Your brain didn't one day decide that you were going to do cocaine or you were going to do heroin just for fun. And every time a patient comes into my office and says, the reason I'm really doing this was because I was really, really bored. So I just decided to, smoke pot day after day. That's a load of crap, quite frankly, because the human brain's amazing. It doesn't repeat behaviors without getting something out of those behaviors. In other words, if somebody is looking for what we call dopamine's that neurotransmitter inside the brain that makes you go, I'm going to get this done today, this done, this done, this done. But it also has a lot to do with getting excited about something and not, having a whole plan of how you're going to achieve that thing. That's dopamine. And many times, how many of us in life are literally chasing dopamine because it makes us feel good? That sensation is actually something that happens in a specific area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. And it's something that your brain can go, wow, this feels good. I want it again. I want it again. I want it again. That same sensation can be recreated sometimes by using different drugs of choice for different individuals. So you can't tell me that somebody does something like that and has a specific addiction because they had nothing better to do. This is sincerely coming from the brain and a neurotransmitter issue within the brain. And that substance or that thing, whatever behavior they're repeating, is actually they're getting that neurotransmitter burst from doing that behavior. And that's where DBT can make an amazing change. So if someone has a lot of anxiety, let's say, and they're using their substance of choice to help bring down that anxiety, they might not be completely aware of it. Those around them might be able to see it a lot clearer than they can see it. But when they're using that substance of choice and they're getting that decrease in their anxiety, it's not that it's all made up inside their head. This is actually very, very real to that individual. This is real. This is that individual possibly getting some serotonin out of the deal, which can allow you to feel more comfortable inside your own skin. Now, with DBT, those skills that Kristen was so eloquently talking about, those skills are amazing. You know, Kristen, you mentioned doing an ice bucket dump with your face. Okay, the most amazing thing, there is actually research that shows very clearly when you do that, and if you guys choose to do that at home, I suggest water that's a little bit under around 50 degrees, no more than 55 degrees. You actually have to do that dump your face, the easiest thing to say. You have to do that for about 30 seconds for your brain to actually release dopamine. Dopamine. You taking a cold shower for 3 minutes releases dopamine that will remain elevated throughout the entire day. If you are chasing dopamine and all of a sudden you do a skill that produces dopamine in your brain, then why keep doing that drug? Well, if you've got a better way to deal with what is happening to your brain, that's what this is all about. We know that drugs of addiction, and there's even behaviors of addiction. You guys, we all know there are certain behaviors that we love to repeat over and over and over again. Many of those behaviors, if it's something like gambling, can be a negative behavior, but you're getting, believe it or not, the human brain gets an amazing rush of dopamine from doing that behavior, which is why you want to repeat it again and again. So all of these issues that we run across, it is so incredibly important. And I tell my patients and their families all the time, this is not something that I just fell into and I was doing this with a friend and I accidentally got addicted, or no, this is because there was a neurochemical imbalance somewhere in the brain and you are trying, your brain is incredibly smart. It will actually lead you to something that allows you to fix that neurochemical imbalance. So addiction is very, very specific and has a specific goal. If we can take that and replace that with a behavior that we get that same neurotransmitter release, but now in a positive way, that is the most opportunistic thing we could possibly do for a patient. DBT actually allows that to happen. So I always, I'm one of those people who love stories. So I hope you guys like stories. So I have worked with many, many patients, and I will tell you this, one of the things that we talk about quite a bit, there's a couple different breathing techniques, you guys, that we use. There's box breathing, there's a couple of different types of breathing. But I will tell you this, in medicine, we are very, very well aware that a certain specific type of breathing will actually drop your blood pressure significantly, like that, literally in a snap. So I will tell you, I had a patient who unfortunately was having what we call a hypertensive urgency. So her blood pressure went through the ceiling, and she was actually in the ambulance on her way, and the EMTs on the ambulance actually contacted me because she said, call her, which they did, which I was so glad. And they put her on the phone with me, and her blood pressure was extraordinarily high. And I said, okay, we're doing our breathing technique right now, because that is the one thing I know I can stimulate the vagus nerve, which actually is a cranial nerve that controls blood pressure to a degree. And I knew that we could drop her blood pressure down. And after repeating that simple breathing technique, she dropped her systolic, the top number on that blood pressure. She dropped it 30 points. 30 points, you guys. I didn't give her a drug. There was nothing else involved except a breathing technique. That is how incredibly powerful this is. This has to do with the brain is an amazing place, but what it has control over, many of us only have an inkling. And it's so funny, because in medicine, you guys, sometimes we think we're all that in a bag of chips. And you know what? We are holy Toledo. The brain is a whole new ball game. Neurology and psychiatry in my world isn't separate. They are completely together, and they have to be treated together, because this is neurochemistry. One of the other things I think was incredibly interesting, there was a tremendous amount of information that actually came out. Granted, it was on borderline personality disorder with DBT, but they actually demonstrated using what we call SPECT scans and PET scans, that there was actually a decrease, a hemodynamic decrease in the activation of the amygdala with DBT, which means amygdala is the area of the brain where you hold all of your emotional memories. Something comes back. You can even have a smell that brings up an emotion and takes you right back into that memory, which also obviously can be involved in PTSD and other different, disease states. So when they saw that that area was actually the stimulation of that area was brought down. In other words, there was a calmness. Those neurons were not firing off at this top rate pace that it was during that activation of the amygdala. Once DBT was instituted, it brought that down. That again is a beautiful illustration of how an actual therapy can change your brain, can change the plasticity of the brain, and can allow a new default pathway to replace an old default pathway. So this is no different, and I think Mario will appreciate this. This is no different than when someone has a stroke and they can't use their right arm anymore. So what do? They put them in occupational therapy, they put them in physical therapy, and they learn by using a new neuronal network how to actually use that arm again. This is the same principle. You guys, it's just amazing because it's untapped, and what we can do with this, the lives that we can change for the better is really just absolutely remarkable as far as I'm concerned, but I'm a little one-sided. So, but that in a nutshell is my take on DBT from a neurochemical standpoint. So whenever someone comes in and talks to me, everything that they say to me, I try to change into kind of to see what neurochemistry they're actually dealing with, what pathway are they actually dealing with, what's getting overstimulated, what's not getting stimulated enough. Because once you have that information, yes, it does allow, if a medication is necessary at that time, for selection of a medication. But as studies have shown significantly throughout time, medication is not as efficacious alone as it is in conjunction with therapy. That is the best, the strongest way to approach many of different mental illnesses, but many illnesses, period. I don't know my beautiful Wise therapists. So I worked with these guys on the unit, so I know them very well, and they are tough as nails. I don't think there's anything that you guys haven't seen. So, and it was amazing to actually see it, we couldn't completely use the full force DBT, but pieces of DBT that were used on the unit that were just incredible and got amazing results from many of these individuals as well. So it's an exciting portion of medicine to be involved with, because we're not just now focused on symptomatic medicine. In other words, you have a symptom and I give you a drug for the symptom. Here's a better idea. How about we figure out why it's there? What's the underlying chemistry that's keeping it stuck there? What can we do about it? What new pathway can we find? And how do we reinforce that pathway with what good skills and tools? You guys, that's what this is all about. We're changing the world, you know, one person at a time, one patient at a time, you know, one thought at a time. But it's a way to completely change the way we actually attack many of these illnesses, and addiction being number one. So I hope that helps. At least somewhat.
So Dr. Wendy, we've had a couple questions come in through the private chat feature, and one of them is just a request. Could Dr. Wendy share the BP lowering breathing technique or share a resource to learn it? So I don't know if we want to do a quick, let's all kind of bow our heads and namaste here. But if you want to, I was wondering that myself. And particularly, Dr. Wendy, I don't know if that breathing technique has applications to the world of addiction and when you're feeling edgy and anxious, but I would be willing to bet that it probably does. So with that, can you answer that question? Then we had a couple more come in via the
you bet.
Okay, go ahead, Dr.
You bet. So there's two different ways, but this is the down and dirty way, you guys. If we want to just boom, let's hit this, let's hit it hard. And this is how you do it. It is 2 short breaths through the nose, 1 long breath through the mouth. But when you do the short breaths through the nose, the first breath through the nose, you want to be real big. And then that second breath is just to open the alveoli of the lungs a little bit more. And then it's going to be out through the mouth. So you guys, let's try it together. You guys ready? It's going to sound like this. Okay, guys, ready? Here we go. Again. One more time.
That's good.
Can you guys feel it? It's amazing. It is utterly amazing. So there's a couple other different techniques that you can use, but that's the shortest down and dirty one to use.
Wendy, do the short and repeat the exercise one more time. You don't have to do it, but it's how many in and what out and
you got it. So just real easy, 2 short breaths through the nose, 1 long breath out through the mouth. I usually ask patients to repeat it 3 times. And remember, that first breath in through the nose is the real big one. That second breath is kind of a little bit smaller, but it's just to pop the alveoli of the lungs. And then exhale out through the mouth. And it can work amazingly well. And remember, when someone is under a tremendous amount of stress, say they're being confronted by whatever that substance is being right in front of them. And as one of my patients said the other day to me, man, I was with my buddies and they were all doing it. Everybody's doing it. I could feel it. I wanted to do this. And I said, what did you do? And he said, well, that dumb breathing technique that you taught me, you know, and he was able, thank goodness, to bring his adrenaline level down by bringing down his heart rate. The minute you drop that heart rate, you guys, you're going to drop that cortisol response, that adrenaline response that's kicking out, which means now your brain is very, very prehistoric. So your brain has no idea if you're sitting in a group of your friends and they've all got whatever substance it is that you're trying to stay away from, and you're going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It has no idea if you're there or in a jungle being chased by a lion. Your brain has the exact same physiological response. In other words, pupils will dilate, all of your blood runs into your legs, and your heart rate goes through the ceiling. So if we can do anything at that moment to interrupt that pathway from going off, that's a win. That's an absolute win. Sorry, long version.
No, that's
Great.
good. Well, I know we answered that question without a doubt. Couple more. I'm going to get to there was. Let me try to go back. Well, there was one question to the Wise Practice and to Dr. Besler, but the question was, how accessible is this to people in active addiction and the resources for someone on Medicaid, for example? Which there are two questions there. Is DBT the kind of thing you want to wait to, like if someone's actively using, do we let that sort out? Like, I don't know that ever gets sorted out without help. Okay. But how do you, I know the latter question could be answered through the Psychology Today link that was posted, perhaps, but I want everybody to know that the person that asked this question, I also sent my email address to I'm going to take it upon myself to call our community mental health provider to try to chase down the answer to that question. Okay. I know that Kristen, you offered to help people navigate through finding resources. Thank you for that. But what's the answer to that first question? Then I'm going to get to an entirely second, another question that someone asked about CBT relative to DBT. But go ahead, Kristen. Active users, how quickly, starting right away?
There's definitely a gray area. I wish I had a cookie cutter answer for you, but to be dialectical, there's pros and cons to either or. I'd say number one, no matter who you are, we always want safety first. The number one goal of coping is to not make the problem worse. We want you to be safe. In terms of using it in conjunction, the person has to be wanting to do it to some degree. That's one key thing is this cannot be a situation where somebody's saying, you know, I'll sign my kid up and they'll be there. They have to want to be there. They could be a little ambivalent getting there, but because it's definitely something they have to be engaged with. Oftentimes people tend to really want to do it because it is fun to be able to help yourself and learn these things. But what we do here, for example, is we have a discussion and it's about level of care. So if you're somebody who is really going through it, as long as you're meeting with Dr. Besler or another care team and you have a process therapist, whether it's me or another person, and you have your sponsor, yeah, come on into skills in conjunction. Absolutely. Now, if things are going so fast paced and that person might not be able to handle it all at once, I'd say level of care is first make sure somebody's safe, and then we assess what they need, right? I don't know if that's your guys' take on it. As far as the community mental health question, it's also a gray area, and that's where I'd love to help you. I love to solve problems. I know when I was in the hospital, I heard a lot of no's that can't be done, and a lot of times it definitely could when we would explore. So in community mental health, the DBT is definitely getting more exposure. There, you're going to see DBT a lot. You're going to see like CNS and Easter seals are doing it. You just have to ask questions in terms of, is this DBT for everybody or the strict BPD targeted programming? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And what, so to the person that asked that question about, is it accessible to the Medicaid population? Like I said, I am going to do that requisite due diligence to find out how accessible, because I know, you know, Jill, McKenzie, Kristen, you all said that in Oakland County, it is accessible. And that if it's accessible in Oakland County, it has to be accessible in Washtenaw County. It's just a matter of finding out what the resource is and making certain that that link becomes a part of this, you know, the next email blast. So no, I'm going to do that. We got some more questions coming in.
Can I make just a, sorry,
Yeah.
Mario, can I
No,
just say
that's
one more
okay.
thing on that same thing? So the community mental health programs that are available, everyone that Kristen was referring to. So I have my own practice, but one day a week, I actually go into the community mental health programs because that's all we deal with, honestly, in this particular program that I'm involved with in Mount Clemens is all addiction. So what happens in that program which is the vast majority of those individuals are Medicaid. I get to see them, but in between seeing them, they actually have to see the therapist. And then we kind of rotate in between. And many of those therapists, they're not as qualified as my Wise Practice people are as far as the full DBT program, but they have certain areas of DBT that they're trying to incorporate because it's so phenomenal to have some of those skills that you can teach individuals. So it's definitely gaining momentum, and the community mental health programs are I think well aware of that.
Yeah, and to that end, and I want everybody to know, when you see me looking down like this, I am looking at text messages, but I assure you they're all about this wonderful Zoom thing. So here's what I've learned in the last 10 minutes. I got a text. I know that Washtenaw Community Mental Health has DBT therapists. Okay,
Right.
So I'm gonna, like I said, I am going to find out the specifics about that and publish it. I'll get it to Brandon to make sure it's inserted in the video recording. We've got stuff coming in via the chat feature, which is awesome. Before I ask this other question, the body controls so much that we try to control with our mind. We try to think our way out of things. If we just listen to our body, we can avoid so much. Polyvagal theory, etc. So look, by the way, that came from a therapist. So here's who is in recovery, by the way, long-term recovery. So I want to read this question. Let me make sure I didn't. Okay, the first speaker, that would be Kristen, mentioned potentially re-traumatizing people practicing DBT. I learned DBT in a group. Wouldn't that minimize trauma when you have the support of a group? I didn't hear group therapy mentioned. It was extremely beneficial, and I do believe all humans benefit and grow. So again, just so everybody knows, I am not rude. I'm getting questions coming in from the webinar chat feature, the private chat feature, text messages, and this is all good stuff. I'm not complaining. Okay, so Kristen, Jill, McKenzie, you guys want to take that one on? Because in just private chats with you, you're contemplating doing some group stuff, but why don't you address that real quick?
Yeah, I love that you brought this up so we could clarify too. So when I'm saying about process therapy, old school, what we call it here is supportive therapy, looks like you go into a therapist once a week, you chat, which is awesome. And to bring up Deb Hollander, I love that she brings up mirror neurons. So somebody witnessing your pain, going to therapy, just somebody sitting with you is cathartic and healing just on its own. So we don't want to take away that from the therapy setting. In DBT therapy, the therapy piece can be very healing in the group therapy. What I'm talking about is with the addiction component and trauma. If we go to a therapist that is very green or is just doing classic supportive therapy where they have best of intentions, they're very validating, and someone's coming in each session and they're just word vomiting their trauma, we're lighting up the parts of the brain that were there when they experienced that without tools. And so for a lot of those people, they're going to get urges. They're going to feel more distressed after the session. So my point is with DBT is sometimes we think about addiction. We've just gotten sober and we're processing things and they're coming to us. This can feel very intense. We're recalling things. I mentioned things like guilt and shame. That's a lot on a person. So with DBT, we need skills in conjunction, or for some of us before that, very common here at our practice. Someone might come into process therapy. It is way too soon. Dr. Besler talked about the vagus nerve. If we don't know how to calm down our vagus nerve, and now we're sitting here thinking of something that's highly triggering and we get stress from that, talking about it more can be triggering. And that's where I'm talking about re-traumatization. Is it's almost like we're taking somebody, and we're taking an alcoholic, we're going to a bar together, sitting in front of a drink. We have no tools at that point. So DBT therapy is not what I'm saying is a problem at all. That's green light. What I'm saying is sometimes it's too soon for people to come in and do process therapy without structure. DBT has a ton of structure and coping tools. So let's say you start talking about your trauma. Well, you get triggered, we have distress tolerance skills. We have a community call. We have the group we can go to for that support. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll wait to see what my text.
Oh, yeah.
This one didn't come via the chat feature. It came, a lot of people had my personal cell number, which is awesome. I want to read this.
Mario, can I add something really quickly?
Yeah,
though,
sure.
So,
Go right ahead,
yes,
Jill.
it's a full comprehensive DBT program, the way it was initially developed and how still a comprehensive program would be, is that the skills are taught in a group. There's a lot of value, especially for people that potentially have difficulty in interacting with other people or become dysregulated by other people. There's a ton of value in that. At the same time, we have people that have tried the group and feel that they would benefit more from individual skills coaching. So what we're trying to do is not close the door for people that are looking for or more comfortable with an individual approach to learning the skills. We're providing that to people that really need the skills. They don't need a full year. They don't necessarily want to be in a 2.5 hour group every week, or maybe they aren't qualified to be in that program, or that they don't have the time to invest in that. So we're trying to promote that these skills are still helpful, even if that's not the format that works best for you.
Okay. McKenzie, you want to say hi? Just so we can hear what there you are. Okay, great. So,
Sure.
Yeah, so.
I was actually, in addition to what Jill and Kristen were saying, when we do individualized DBT skills coaching with teens and with adults, it makes it so we can really tailor it to the skills that you need first. So it really helps with that individualized approach and trying to get those skills really in that time, that short duration of time of that 6 weeks that we take it. Some people go a little bit longer than that, but it's really tailored to you and what you want to learn and what's beneficial to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a comment and a question. It seems that CBT is perhaps the root philosophy whereby an individual develops the skills of understanding, in parentheses, cognitive, the nature of the problems or problem, and then actively working on correcting them. DBT, as I understand it, incorporates the concept of acceptance as opposed to, quote, powering through, unquote. Is it accurate to conclude that CBT is less nuanced, is a less nuanced approach, but perhaps more powerful and user-friendly set of tools than DBT? Furthermore, is it safe to conclude that DBT may be more for later fine-tuning and CBT for attacking the problem on the front end?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You don't want to hide.
So I want to let you know too, I got my training through the Beck Institute through CBT before I did DBT. And why I bring this up is because when I was new at therapy, I was wondering, gosh, there's all these tools and all these great things we can help with, but there was something just missing. And in some ways it was just felt a little invalidating, because in ways, I don't think this is the intention of CBT, but CBT has, with the cognitive model, a heavy emphasis on change this thought, change this behavior. So I guess what I would answer that with is there's different perceptions. There's probably people here that might feel differently than me, and that's A-okay. I would just say that DBT is additive. It's not taking away. It has CBT in it. We're still going to challenge thinking errors. We're still going to shift thoughts and explore behaviors, but we're going to identify that emotions absolutely need a place in the room for mindfulness and making decisions. So I say the biggest difference with DBT is it's not just this emphasis on the social component and having effective relationships and community, but it's also about that mindfulness component, bringing in, Marcia brings in Zen and Buddhist practice as well there. So it's additive. It's not going to take away. And it's, when you met, I think you mentioned something about the skills and the ease of it. That's the thing I love the most about DBT. So I do other therapies as well. But when you look at something like somatic experiencing or IFS or even CBT, I get from clients a lot that it's too generalized. With DBT, I am handing you something that's literally like, this is going on, do this. So I would say DBT is still very structured. As somebody who's trained in both, I do both. I've not said, oh, I'm not doing CBT anymore, but I'm definitely going to pull what works best for that individual.
Okay, great. One additional question. Is there DBT for grief support?
Ooh, that's something we should all look into. There definitely should be. And it's interesting somebody asked that because I've had an ongoing client who has really been using DBT in conjunction with an ongoing loss. They came in when they were at the start, they were pre-mourning, and then after the loss and a year later, and the DBT piece that's really been instrumental for that person is a concept called radical acceptance, and learning how to accept things as they are and use these skills to accept what's happened, but also still create a beautiful life as she has. So I actually don't know, but I think there should be.
Well, here, maybe Kristen, Jill, McKenzie, Dr. Wendy is, so the answer is there could be. You can go get DBT therapy if you're grieving the loss of someone, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Especially
so,
when,
go ahead.
especially just when you think about it from a, I always go to the neurochemistry, the neural component of the brain. Remember, this is when you lose someone that's close to you, this is heavily in the amygdala, which is that area of the brain that has all of those emotional memories. And that was actually where they found in studies that after DBT, using these SPECT and PET scans, actually were able to bring down that level of overactivity coming out of the amygdala. So it's very, very easy to extrapolate how this could be incredibly helpful to somebody who's in the grieving process.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I hope that answered that question. I'm trying to think if we've got, I don't think, in the chat feature, somebody put the name of a certified or someone who's an experienced therapist in our area. In fact, I don't know if she's in our area, and takes Medicaid. Name of the therapist, you guys will see it. I think you should all see it in the chat feature there. Can you see it, Dr. Wendy?
I don't. Let me take a
oh
look.
Boy, I hope everybody.
Yes,
Yeah.
see it.
You
Yeah.
can see
Now I
it.
got it.
So
Yep.
look, but that, I'm not going to leave it at that, just so everyone knows. I committed to trying to get everybody a link, and I'm going to do that. So I think that covers all the questions. I did have another text. I've got to meet these women. So know that you struck a chord there from a therapy perspective. And I just want, with that, we're going to wrap this up. Hang on one second, though. Don't anybody zoom off. Again, I wanted to let everybody know, remind you to please fill out our survey. We do take that constructive feedback seriously to improve our forums and everything we do. So please do that. And reminder, our next meeting isn't virtual, it is live. And here's the information on, is your contact information up there, guys? The last slide?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Put that, no, that's okay. I want it up there so that, because when we record it, people should know how to get you. So Wise Practice, Neuropsychiatric Specialists, Dr. Wendy Besler, Kristen O'Dwyer, Jill Polisano, and McKenzie. You flip screens on me. McKenzie, what's your last name?
McKenzie Luker. McKenzie Luker.
What was that, McKenzie?
Luker.
McKenzie Luker. Okay. And just one more shout out to Dr. Deb Hollander and Dr. Stephanie Brady for connecting me with all of you. And you're awesome. And thank you for sharing your expertise and time with us tonight. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Thank you.
Yep, we'll see you at the Michigan Theater.
See you
Bye-bye.
there.
Bye.
Bye.